My father leaned in at my wedding like he was about to say something tender, something a bride might carry for the rest of her life. Instead, his lips barely moved, and he whispered, "Good riddance." For 1 second, the whole room seemed to lose sound. The quartet near the windows, the soft clink of champagne glasses, my new husband turning to greet one of his uncles, all of it went thin and far away, like I was standing underwater in 6-inch heels with a veil pinned to my skull and a smile I suddenly had to hold in place with brute force. I did hold it. That was the important part. My name is Naomi Bell. I'm 34 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life learning how to keep my face calm while something uglier than anger settles underneath it. My father, Harold Bell, straightened his jacket and stepped back like he hadn't just buried a knife in the middle of my wedding photos. Across the room, his wife Denise was watching us with that still, polished expression of hers. Not confused, not concerned, just unsurprised. That told me more than the whisper did. I smiled for the photographer. I let my father put his hand lightly at my back for one more picture. I thanked guests. I kissed cheeks. I moved through my own wedding like nothing had happened, because I was not going to hand that man a public scene he could later call oversensitive. But once the music swelled again and he went back to looking like a respectable father, I understood something cold and clean. That wasn't a slip. So if that was what my father really thought of me, what exactly had I been to him all these years? And as always, this story is a work of fiction, created by Revenge Pulse for storytelling purposes. That night, after the last guest had gone home and the flowers from the reception were already starting to smell too sweet in the apartment, I opened my laptop and told myself I was only checking something small. Just one look, just to be sure. Evan was in the kitchen, loosening his tie, moving quietly the way kind men do when they can tell your thoughts are louder than your voice. I sat at the dining table in my wedding after clothes and pulled up old bank statements, transfer confirmations, email threads I had not read in months, some in years. And there it was. Not one rescue. A pattern. The mortgage on my father's house had stumbled more than once, and somehow I was always the soft place it landed. Denise's credit card had drifted too close to the edge more than once, too, and every time, my phone rang with that same careful tone people use when they want money without sounding like they want money. Mara's school fees, insurance gaps, a broken air conditioner in July, a tax notice, a bank call, a month when the mortgage came up short just this once. It was never framed as sacrifice. It was always framed as family. Help your father a little. This month only. You know how things are. And the ugliest part was not the money. It was the shape of it. When there was a birthday dinner or some small happy gathering, I was treated like a guest. Polite, peripheral. But when something cracked, I became immediate family again. Useful family. Evan set a mug beside me and looked at the screen. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "In that house," he said, "when do they remember you most when they love you, or when they need your money?" I looked at years of transfers and finally understood what frightened me. It wasn't the total. It was how completely they had built their lives around a hidden emergency door with my name on it. Once I started looking at the pattern, I couldn't stop seeing Denise in it. She had a way of talking about me that sounded flattering if you didn't listen too closely. That was her talent. She never said thank you in any way that cost her something. She preferred moral language, cleaner, more useful. Naomi's more stable than the rest of us. She's practical. She understands responsibility. Well, the one doing better should help family. That's just how it works. She said things like that at the dinner table while passing the green beans, like she was describing the weather. Harold almost never backed her up directly. He didn't need to. He just let the words sit there, warm and unquestioned, because they benefited him. That was his style. In that house, money was never discussed as a request. It was floated into the air the moment I walked in. A tax bill, a repair, a gap, a late notice. And if I said I was tired or stretched thin, Denise could pivot with almost artistic precision. We all get tired, sweetheart. Then, gently, your father's under so much pressure. By the end of the conversation, I was no longer a daughter with limits. I was a solution with feelings that were becoming inconvenient. Mara had grown up inside that logic. 19 years old, not cruel, not calculating, just used to a world where shortages closed when I appeared. She once asked me, completely sincerely, "Are you still covering the insurance this month?" like she was asking if I'd bring ice to dinner. That was the real narrative. If I kept paying, I was good, mature, loving. If I stopped, I would instantly become selfish. And sitting there in my new apartment, I finally understood that my father's whisper at the wedding had not come out of nowhere. It was simply the most honest sentence that family had ever said about me. So why had Denise spent years making sure I felt indebted to them unless the whole system depended on it the next morning? I stopped looking at the family in general and started looking at the house. That was where the pattern had roots. Not emotional roots, financial ones. Cleaner, harder, easier to track if you were willing to be honest. The first time I put money into that place, my father had just lost his job. The mortgage was late. His voice on the phone was smaller than I had ever heard it, and I stepped in because that is what daughters do when they still think rescue and love are the same thing. After that, it never became monthly. That would have been too obvious. It became occasional, strategic, just often enough to keep the walls standing and everyone inside them from ever fully learning what life looked like without me. I found old transfers tied to missed payments, property taxes, insurance gaps, emergency repairs, a furnace one winter, storm damage one spring, a kitchen leak that somehow became my problem by the end of the conversation. The house had eaten years of my life in manageable bites, and still Harold liked to tell people he had held on to that house through hard times. I had heard him say it at least twice. I had said nothing. Around noon, Aunt Joanne called to congratulate me again on the wedding, and maybe she heard something in my voice because she went quiet for a second before saying, "Your father doesn't know how to lose that house." Then she added, colder, "No, that's not right. He doesn't know how to lose the person who keeps saving it." That landed exactly where it needed to. I was never invited to carry the emotional weight of that family, only the financial risk. An hour later, I made an appointment with attorney Celia Warren, and when I walked into her office, I felt something strange and almost sharp with relief. For the first time in my life, I was not there to save my father's house. I was there to learn how to stop letting it call me. Celia Warren's office smelled faintly like paper, lemon polish, and expensive discretion. I liked her immediately. Not because she was warm. She wasn't. She was precise, which in my experience is much more useful. I laid everything out the way I would for a client whose life was messier than they wanted to admit. The wedding, the whisper, the mortgage, Denise's cards, the emergency transfers, the quiet little bailouts that had become part of the architecture of my father's household. Celia took notes, then drew clean lines through the mess. "This," she said, tapping one column, "is voluntary support." Her pen moved. "This is recurring because you allowed it to become recurring." Another mark. "This can be stopped immediately. This needs notice. This needs documentation." It should have made me feel trapped. Instead, it did the opposite. I wasn't tied there by law. I was tied there by repetition, by guilt, by years of being the person who stepped in before the damage became visible. My phone lit up in the middle of the meeting. Denise. I looked at the preview first. No mention of the wedding, no apology, no awkward attempt to explain what Harold had said. Just this: "Can you handle the insurance payment before Friday? We're tight this week." I let out one short laugh, not because it was funny, because it was so clean in its cruelty. They did not think they needed to repair anything before asking again. They thought I would keep paying through insult, through silence, through anything. So I didn't cut everything that hour. Not yet. I told Celia to pause the automatic payments I controlled, review every linked account, and build me a complete record of what had been running through my life without my consent becoming active again. Celia closed the file and looked at me. Are you going to let them treat this like a post-wedding mood? That was when I understood the first thing I needed to cut was not the money. It was the hope that they would ever understand on their own. 2 days later, Celia called me just after 9 in the morning and said, I think you need to hear this one in person. That is never a sentence that improves with distance. I went straight to her office. She had 3 printouts waiting, clipped neatly, each one more offensive than the last in that quiet, civilized way money problems often are. One was a note from the mortgage servicer's call log. Another was tied to a home repair account. The third was a payment arrangement on a utility balance that had been pushed forward instead of paid. Same pattern in all of them. Not my signature, not fraud. Something uglier in its own way because it was so casual. Naomi will handle it. She always does. We just need a few more days, Denise had actually said to one of the vendors. Naomi usually takes care of this part. Not asked, not hoped. Stated, like I was a checking account with a pulse. I sat there looking at those pages and understood something all the way down. They had not been reacting to my help for years. They had been building on it, delaying bills because I would cover them, letting balances ride because I existed, planning their life after my wedding as if marriage might change my address, but not my function. Then Harold's voicemail came through while I was still in Celia's office. No apology, no mention of the wedding, no explanation for the whisper, just his voice, annoyed and familiar. Mortgage is due Friday. You know what needs to happen. That was it. No. Are you okay? No. We need to talk. Just an instruction issued from a man who believed the machine would keep running. I looked at Celia and said, do all of it. She nodded once and began writing, and by the time I listened to his message again that night, I didn't feel hurt anymore. I felt clarity. That man was not afraid of losing a daughter. He was afraid of losing the system that had been living off her. The first crack showed up before noon, not in some dramatic courtroom way, not with sirens or shouting, just a failed payment where everyone in that house had apparently assumed my money would slide in, soft and invisible, the way it always had. It didn't. By early afternoon, one of Denise's cards was declined at a department store. I know because she left me a voicemail that began with forced confusion and ended with naked irritation. There seems to be some kind of issue, she said. Call me back immediately. An hour later, the mortgage servicer's reminder hit Harold instead of disappearing into the usual quiet space where I used to make problems vanish. A utility balance they had let roll forward on habit stopped rolling. One by one, the old mechanisms stalled, then locked. For the first time in years, that household hit the hard edge of its own shape. Harold called 3 times. Denise texted 6. The first messages sounded like they thought this was an error. By the last one, she had found the story she wanted. You cannot let personal feelings hurt the whole family. There it was. Clean. Useful. I was not the daughter who had been used too long. I was the selfish woman weaponizing emotion against innocent people. Mara called once, sounding genuinely shaken. I don't understand what's happening. Neither had I. Not really. Until now. Aunt Joanne called after that and said, when people get used to a safety net, they start calling it cruelty when it's removed. Evan took my phone and set it face down on the table. I wasn't enjoying any of it, but for the first time, that house had to speak directly to the people living inside it. Then, just before dinner, Harold texted, "What are you doing to this family?" I looked at the screen and thought, not the family. The system. Celia had the packet delivered the next morning. Not emailed, not discussed. Delivered. A courier brought it to Harold's front door in a flat white envelope with Celia Warren's firm name printed in the corner. Clean and expensive and impossible to mistake for anything casual. I wasn't there, which mattered to me. I had no interest in standing on a lawn while people who had mistaken entitlement for love discovered the difference. The packet said exactly what it needed to say. Effective immediately. All voluntary financial support from me was terminated. I would no longer cover, supplement, guarantee, or informally absorb any mortgage obligation, card balance, utility shortfall, repair expense, or household cost not legally mine. No third party was authorized to refer to me as an implied source of backing, and any future attempt to use my name, position, or payment history that way would be considered unauthorized. Then came the line Celia and I had both agreed needed to stay exactly as written. Naomi Bell has elected to align her financial life with her current household only. That was the real blow. Not the legal language, the clarity. I wasn't pausing. I wasn't punishing. I was relocating the center of my life. Harold didn't call right away. Denise didn't either. That told me more than shouting would have. They had gone still because the papers had done what arguments never do. They had removed ambiguity. Even Mara, from what Aunt Joanne later told me, stopped saying things like, "She'll calm down." No, this was not anger cooling into forgiveness. It was structure hardening into fact. That evening, Harold finally left one voicemail. No mention of the mortgage. No request to explain things face to face. Just one question. Quiet and stripped bare. "Are you really going to leave me like this?" And for the first time, I knew they had finally named the fear correctly. Harold asked to see me 2 days later. Not at the house. Not with Denise there to smooth over his worst instincts and sharpen his weakest ones. I agreed to coffee in a hotel lobby downtown, bright enough to keep people polite, public enough to keep everyone honest, or as honest as my father knew how to be. He was already seated when I arrived. Hands folded, looking older than he had at the wedding and somehow less sympathetic for it. "Thank you for coming," he said. I sat down. "You have 15 minutes. He flinched at that, then tried the first door. "You're taking this too far." Of course I was. Then came the others. He didn't mean it like that. It was one sentence. Mara didn't deserve to be caught in the middle. Denise was upset. Evan was clearly influencing me. Family should not be dismantled over a remark made in anger. I let him spend the words. Then I said, "This is not about one sentence." He went quiet. "It's about years of being remembered when something was due." I said, "Years of being useful, but not valued. Years of watching you let other people turn me into an emergency fund with a birthday. That's unfair." "No," I said. "Unfair was hearing what you really thought of me on my wedding day." He reached for the old ground then. Obligation. Blood, the shape of a daughter's duty. I cut across it before he could settle there. "I did more than a daughter is supposed to do." I said, "And you did less than a father should have." That landed. He looked down at the table. I didn't soften. "You said good riddance." I told him, "I'm just finally giving you exactly what you asked for." Then I stood before he could drag the conversation back into guilt, and for the first time in years, I walked away from my father without carrying a single bill in my head. By the end of that week, I finished the last small things that used to keep my old life wired into my new one. I changed the contact information that still pointed back toward me. I removed the final automatic links that had survived on habit more than intent. I told Celia that if anything else came from Harold or Denise, letters, calls, pressure, explanations, guilt dressed as family, her office would handle it, not mine. That mattered more than I expected, because what I was cutting was never just the mortgage, never just the cards, never just the quiet, stupid little rescues that had once made me feel useful and later made me feel owned. I was cutting the reflex, the guilt, the old poisoned belief that being a good daughter meant stepping in every time someone who did not respect me ran out of money. Life with Evan grew clearer almost immediately. Dinner stayed dinner. No one tilted the conversation toward a late payment. No one sighed theatrically about a bill and waited for me to volunteer. Weekends arrived whole, intact, uninterrupted by the house across town and whatever fresh instability it had mistaken for my responsibility. I did not punish Mara. I answered once when she texted, kept it kind and kept it short. I would not make her wear the full weight of what her father had built, but I did not reopen the door either. Kindness is not the same as access. I had finally learned that. As for Harold, there was no easy reconciliation, no speech, no clean apology arriving at the perfect emotional hour. Just silence, which was more honest than anything else he had offered me lately. On my wedding day, he had said, "Good riddance," like he was pushing something burdensome out of his life. In the end, I did leave. But what disappeared from that house was never the burden. It was the last support beam. And this time, good riddance was mine, not spoken, lived,